Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Maya Hushan. We'll tell you about Maya in just a moment. Those of you who have watched the show before know that Grace Under Pressure, we talk about the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment that we sometimes sweep under the rug. But grace for me is the generosity we demonstrate, respect we show for one another, and compassion we need to show. And when you do it as a leader, and Maya will talk about this, it's about acting for the benefit of others and energizing the team around you. Welcome, Maya. I'm so honored to have you on the show today.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on your show.
Great. Well, I have been a fan of Maya's for almost 20 years now. She was just a teenager when we first met. So anyway, Maya is a native of Taiwan, but has been in the States for a long time. She's a globally recognized keynote speaker, executive educator, and a master certified coach. She specializes in global leadership, which really means she speaks and teaches around and coaches around the world. She was ranked in the top 8 of global solution thinkers by Thinkers 50. She's also a top leadership guru by Global Gurus, and she's a thought leader in management. She's the founder and president of Global Leadership Associates. Where did that name come from? Anyway, her book, Global Leadership, The Next Generation, was a seminal book published by Harvard Business School. Her new book, and we're going to talk about it, is quite remarkable. It's called Saving Face: How to Preserve Dignity and Build Trust. And do we need that now? I think so. So she resides in San Diego. She is a native, as I said, of Taiwan, fluent in Mandarin and English, far better English than mine. She went to Penn, and anyway, she's got an MA from Penn, and she lectures around the world, including at UCSD, Chicago, USC, and the Tech School of Business. So, Maya, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome. So,
thank you, John.
Great. As we've talked, and I always start these shows, executives around the world are feeling a lot of pressure, and you have a unique perspective. It's a global perspective. What are you hearing from execs in different parts of the world? So,
well, John, since March that we started the lockdown and quarantine, and so I continue to coach and work with leaders around the world. And I have heard so much about what they're going through. And, they are, on top of the loss of business, revenues, and clients, and they have to make very tough decisions of laying people off and cutting costs. And also they're experiencing low morale and motivations. And personally, that they also felt that there was this sense of isolation and even burned out, and the fatigue and loneliness. So there were so many, it's a wide range of emotions that leaders are going through during this very, very tough time.
Right.
I heard this saying recently from a leader that he said, we're all in the same storm, but we're all on a different boat.
It's an interesting. So speaking of different boats, I'm familiar, and most of the viewers are pretty wired into what's happening here in the States. What about Asia? Are things better, or is the loneliness still there, the pressure still there, or has it eased up a little bit? So.
Well, as I work with leaders in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world, I've seen that there's a difference in terms of mentality as well as their leadership and their approach. So as you know that we're still in the midst of this pandemic in the U.S. and but some different part of the countries such as Asia that in Europe they are preparing for over the summer things are eased up a little bit, but they're continuing to prepare for the winter months coming. But recently I've talked to leaders that in Asia, and that actually where that used to be very, very intense in terms of the pandemic, that people are kind of telling me that we're pretty much life is back to normal. nobody is fighting for wearing masks.
Yeah.
They look at this as a public health issue, and no, they look at this as a greater good. If I wear a mask, I protect you, I protect myself. So there was nobody arguing or fighting about this. It's not a political thing, and they also continue to really follow the guidelines coming from the government. And so, for the most part, that things are really under control. My native country, Taiwan, for example, become a model country because they were right next to China, but since March, that actually the beginning of the year until now, we only have 7 deaths.
Wow.
7. It's not a single digit. So it's because everybody was in this together and they will work hard together to keep this from spreading.
You know, that's such a valid point. I mean, wearing a mask, I mean, it's a public health issue. From your perception, how do leaders reinforce that? Is it a matter of walking the talk and doing it themselves, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, they definitely walk the talk, right? And they demonstrate empathy, and that's actually one of the key things that I've noticed that leaders are doing when the leaders are doing well is that they really focus on the safety and well-being of their employees and also their customers. There was a recent CEO survey, just recently that the survey showed up that there was a common theme from the CEOs. They say, some of the quotes here says that empathy and compassion are potentially the most important traits of a leader during this pandemic. Every minute you spend putting your team first will pay off in years of loyalty and engagement from the team.
Isn't that powerful? And it's so simple and so obvious that we forget it. But you said something, and I think it's so good. Empathy is kind of a watchword in the States or among business. But you said the operative term, and that's demonstrate empathy.
Yes, you have to show it, right? So it's not just talk. You actually have to take actions. And then the leaders who were doing very well leading their organization during the crisis, they really show up and they take actions to demonstrate that empathy. And they listen, they communicate, right? And then they really try to understand what other people are going through, and they provide resources to help people cope. Online counseling, provide EAP, and provide training on technologies and leaders how to manage remote teams and change management. And they also recognize that we're all in different boats, even though we're in the same store, right? So some people have to deal with taking care of their elderly or children at home, and they have various issues they have to deal with personally. So then they provide those support to protect the employee's time and privacy. So, during mealtime or kids taking a nap, they try to avoid scheduled meeting during those times and really prioritize the well-being and health of their people.
That's great. That's putting it into action. That's so powerful. Now let's get to saving grace. You write in the preface something I find very insightful, and I'll ask you to explain. You write, building authentic and lasting human relations may be the most important calling for leaders in this century. I agree. Tell me what you mean by that.
So when I wrote the book, Saving Face, that I have been working with leaders around the world for decades. And I have heard so many challenges that they're going through, and then particularly now with the global pandemic, that we are particularly need to focusing on this concept of saving face. Now, why is this so important right now? Is that we're working with diverse teams, right, across geography, time zones, different cultural background, different generations and genders, and not only that, we are working remotely. Okay, and then so we have to use technology effectively, and we're lacking face-to-face interactions. And on top of that, our bigger, larger environment, social media, is impacting us. It is so easy for us to offend or insult somebody without the normal check and balance of having to actually confront them face-to-face with your slides. So considering this, kind of a larger environment that we're living in, And in addition to the pandemic, we're also working at dealing with the social injustice and the very divisive climate that we live in. So that's why it's particularly important for leaders to focusing on building authentic and lasting relationships with people. And and that is really the foundation of how you demonstrate your leadership to help the organization reunite and also help your organization continue to move forward in a positive way.
Great. And now we're going to drill down into this concept because it's so relevant to our theme of grace under pressure. Your title of your book is Saving Grace. And for some folks, me, I would think that's saving means avoiding embarrassment. You go far deeper than that. So it's about understanding the motivations of others. Talk about that. So.
Right. Well, so let's first identify. So the title is Saving Face, right? And that's it. And so first, let's define what face means. Okay. So face represents the individual's self-esteem, self-worth, identity, reputation, our pride, and dignity. So it's all of that, and that's what face means. And then so it is about inside and out, how we see ourselves and also how others perceive us. Now, face is a universal concept beyond its origins in Asia. And it really speaks to a deeper human need to be respected, appreciated, and accepted.
Right.
And it's really about how we interact with each other. And this face really permeates all levels of social and business interactions.
Right.
So when you hear somebody says, it's not about the money, the real issue is often about face.
That's so good, and it aligns with something that you touched on it, and what and I use the R in grace for it. It's respect, but
Yes.
so let's walk through because you dimensionalize this so well. Let's talk about honoring face. What does that mean? So.
Right, very good. So there's three key concepts of face, right? The first one is honoring face. So what does that mean? So honoring face is that we look at, I like to think face is like our social currency of our time, right? So the more face you have, and the easier and faster you can get things done. So imagine that we build a supply of face in this bank account with someone that's continuously making deposits. Okay, we build trust, we show respect, we express gratitude and appreciation, and we compliment people, and we give credit where it's due. We empathize, okay? And we put ourselves in their place to understand their challenges and what they're going through, and then we give people their voice equal time and weight. So when we continue to make that deposit, right, we're honoring face that when we need to make a withdrawal, we're careful not to make someone lose face. For example, provide feedback in a way that saves face and preserve dignity. If we mistakenly cause them to lose face, the relationship can still be saved if there are enough deposit to cover the withdrawal. It's called overdraft protection. Right? So
that's great. I love that. Yeah, that's a good. So,
yeah.
And let's dwell down on that for a second, just before we move on. If you're a manager, and part of successful managers, leaders always provide good feedback. Some of that feedback will be very critical. So how does one give feedback in your concept of honoring face? So
very good, very good. So when we provide feedback, I like to think about there are three ways that we typically give feedback, and there are three different approaches. So one is that we go straight talk. Like you talk to the right person at the right time at the right place. Okay, respectfully, accurately, and clearly. Okay, and that's important. That's what straight talk is about, giving that feedback. And you demonstrate respect, yet you at the same time you're holding people accountable. You're kind and firm at the same time. There's also another kind of approach. It's called blunt talk. It's like I get everything out of my chest. I'm gonna give it to you, and I don't really consider if this is the right time, right place, right person. Is this respectful? Is this accurate? Okay, that's blunt talk. Just dump it at you. And the opposite of that is called safe talk. Right? So safe talk is that you dance around the issue. You're very careful, and you're too careful. You're dropping the hints here and there. And at the end of the conversation, the other person may or may not get it. And they walk away not knowing exactly what you're trying to say. And then so the behavior may or may not change as a result of that. And then safe talk is not effective. Blunt talk is not effective. Neither one of those are effective. Straight talk is something that we're striving for. And that's how we honor face, is that we're kind and firm. We hold people accountable. At the same time, we are there to really honor them, and also hold them accountable, and then to make sure that we got our message across.
That's great. Thank you for elaborating. That's very important. Now we've talked honoring face. What about losing face?
Yeah, losing face is something we want to avoid. Losing face describes conditions where people feel devalued, humiliated, or unappreciated. Okay, or sometimes excluded. I like to think of this saying that when I grow up in Taiwan, that my parents and teachers often say this to me, or to the students, that spilled water is hard to regain. So what can you imagine that if you accidentally knock over a glass of water on the table? Okay? How hard is it to get it all back into the glass?
Impossible.
Right? Yeah. And then even if you manage to get some back in the glass, do you still want to drink it? Probably not, right? So now what this means is that spilled water is hard to regain, is that once you have said or done something, you can't take it back. Even if you try to put it back, it's not the same anymore. So that's why as leaders that we want to be mindful and intentional about how we say or do things. Always think about the impact on others, right? And so when people lose face, based on what we do or say, that it provokes a wide range of negative emotions. And people can feel shame, fear, anger, guilt, vulnerability, you name it. And when people feel negatively, that it will directly impact their behaviors and their actions and their performance in the workplace, right? And they would also impact how well they perform at their job, how much they speak up, how much they engage with you to share their ideas, and even how long they stay with the company.
That's such that's a powerful concept, just what you said about the whole idea of losing faith, because if someone, and that's a psychological safety, if I feel that what I say I will be criticized, that's the last time I'm going to speak up. So, and then, from a leadership standpoint, I know you work so well in this area, is especially now, we need everybody pulling together. But if we're shutting people down, it's like operating with one hand tied behind our back. So
absolutely. And so how do you make sure that you don't cause people to lose face? I mean, when you experience problems in relationships, right, people are usually may not use the word, I feel like I've lost face at work. But you hear something like, oh, my boss doesn't appreciate what I do. Or, people don't really treat my ideas seriously. I don't feel I'm being heard. I don't feel I belong. When you hear those expressions, that usually when it comes down to it has to do with that how they feel they're being treated with respect or not, right? And so how do we avoid that? As leader, we always need to lead by example. And we have to get off this autopilot of, because we often don't think about our actions, especially when we're under stress, right? We just run on autopilot, we say or do things, we're in a rush, we just need to get this out. We can cause people to lose face unintentionally, okay? And so When we do that, and you may have the positive intent, but then the impact could be devastating, and you don't even know it.
That's one of the that's a key concept that so many, I know Tasha Urich talks about this. Some of the most well-intended people are hurting, are not helping their others. And now we get to the final concept. We talk about honoring face, losing face, and now saving face. So what does that mean?
So saving face is the authentic and intentional act of turning around a situation to preserve dignity for all parties involved for a positive outcome. Okay, so the key here is the authentic and intentional act. Okay, and so when you earlier we talked about running an autopilot. Saving face is to get off that autopilot and start raising. I like to imagine that Jack, in the old days. You remember we had those radio, that old-fashioned radio, those antenna. You have to, manually raise the antenna, right? Now, what happened when the antenna was down?
No signal.
No signal. You don't hear anything, right? And you don't hear anything, and then you sometimes you hear some static. But when you raise an antenna, what happens?
The signal comes in, and we hear. So.
You can hear the music, you can hear what people are saying on the radio. So the same thing here, that we all have this human antenna, that it's important for us to raise that human antenna when we're interacting with people. Pay attention to what's going on, the context, the reaction of the other person, and what I'm saying, what I'm doing here. So it's the authentic and intentional act of turning around a situation to help the other person feel respected, to preserve their dignity, and for a positive outcome. At the same time, you're not doing safe talk. We're actually going to be able to provide straight talk feedback to help still hold people accountable, but we demonstrate respect for the other person. Yeah.
Now, do you have a story about saving grace that you want to share with us? Not shaving face.
So yes, this is my favorite story. So let's just call this person Jeff. Okay, so not a true real name. So Jeff is the financial director of a global company, and he was facing a big crisis under his watch that a frontline employee had stolen over $100,000 in an 8-month period. So as finance director, Jeff had designed and deployed this entire cash flow process that allowed this employee to commit the fraud undetected. And it was a high-profile case. It was discussed not only in security meetings, but also spread quickly throughout the company. So when the theft was revealed and the scope of this ballooned with each day of this investigation, Jeff felt entirely responsible and personally victimized. It was an example of losing face. Soon, the company's COO planned a meeting with Jeff and his whole team. The stress consumed Jeff. You could tell that he lost weight, he couldn't sleep, he developed a bad rash. So for days, that Jeff felt like a dead man walking. So when the day arrived, the team waited nervously in the conference room, and the COO actually flew in from Germany into the US, and he walked into the conference room, and he broke the tension with just one sentence. He said, "I don't care about the theft." He continued to say that theft is unavoidable, whether one runs a hot dog stand or a multinational company. The company was insured and would be made whole. And the COO said, "I only want to know that you plan to review the process and fix it. And you seem well on your way from what I can see."
What a powerful story. So what happened to Jeff?
What happened to Jeff, right? So Jeff's demeanor immediately brightened. He and his team focused on problem solving throughout the meeting, and Jeff returned to his job with renewed energy. the COO had saved his face. So let's break it down and see, how did the COO do it, right? Number one, he created psychological safety while holding Jeff accountable. He didn't let him off the hook, right? He held him accountable, yet he created psychological safety for him. And then he was kind and firm. He chose his words carefully. He showed humility and emotional intelligence when dealing with this emotionally delicate situation. He helped Jeff, he helped Jeff overcome the shame and embarrassment very quickly and refocus his energy on solving the problem and moving forward. And he sent a clear message to Jeff and his team. I trust you. I have confidence in you to do the right thing.
Right.
And that is his face.
An interesting lesson from that is all of the things that you've said, which are the human dimension and so powerful, and we feel them emotionally. But there's one other very practical lesson that you bring out is he gave Jeff and his team the ability to solve it. Because who's closest to the problem? Jeff and his team, correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's the reason I'm mentioning that is when it comes to grace or this positive idea of positive behavior and saving face, there's a business equation that supports this. Am I correct? So.
Yes, absolutely. Well, when we think about saving face, it really has to do with how leaders show up, and then be mindful about your action and intention, and then the impact on others, right? And so when we think about saving face, it's a soft skill that is hard to do. And so it takes practice, but the good news is that this skill can be developed. And all it takes is for us to be mindful and really pay attention and have that self-awareness. Actually, in the book, I talk about there's 3 A's, the triple A models, right? Is that have that awareness to really understand your own assumptions, behaviors, and bias. And to raise that awareness. And number 2 is to seek to understand the other person's frame of reference, right? And put yourself in their shoes and raise your human antenna. And then so once you're aware of your own bias and assumptions, you're aware of what's happening, the other person's going through, and the 3rd A is adapt. So you adapt your behaviors, take thoughtful actions to produce positive outcome for everyone involved. You think before you act, and it's something that I think the triple A works very well, and it's a simple 3-step process. All you have to do is pause, think, and act.
Right. That's why your book resonates, because it's about a very human thing. We all we lose faith. We lose face. We cause others to lose face. But your book is a practical and tactical way of saying, hey, it's about we're all in this together. And especially now in our time of pandemic, coming together, and the triple A method sums it up neatly. It's awareness, acquire, and adapt. So and we need those little mnemonics to help us get aware of it, because as you have eloquently said, we need to practice this. This takes a conscious awareness. So.
Absolutely. Wow.
Maya, we're coming to an end, and the story you gave us on Jeff was a wonderful story of grace. Is there another story of grace that you want to share from your personal experience? So,
yes, the first thing that came to mind when I think of grace is someone that I respect and love dearly. It's my father-in-law. My father-in-law actually he passed away a few years ago, and then he was a successful entrepreneur, and he ran a hotel business, and he was a very quiet man, and so we were so surprised that when at his funeral there hundreds of people showed up, and then they were sharing stories with the family that we didn't even know about. And for example, he's a part-time employee working at the hotel that was having surgery, and then she couldn't afford it. And so my father-in-law just quietly paid for all the expenses and never mentioned anything to anyone. And he treated his employee with kindness, but he was also very firm about business decisions, and everybody respected him and loved him. And all those years that we just as family, we don't even know about it until he at his funeral and people come to us. So when I think about Grace, I think of my father-in-law. He's authentic, he's strong, and he's very sensitive. He's empathetic, and all of those characters. That's why he has loyal employees working for him for 20, 30 years, and they, no matter what, they stay around.
What a wonderful, wonderful story. That is Grace embodied, reaching out and caring for others and seeking nothing in return. And that's a powerful lesson. So Maya, thank you. How can people find you? And we know Saving Grace, and we see a copy of it in the image behind you. So how can we find you?
Okay, so it's you can actually find the book actually on Amazon.
Hold it up again.
Okay. So Saving Grace: How to Preserve Dignity and Build Trust. So there's the audio and e-version, and as well as the print version on Amazon.com. And you can also go to my website and can learn all about the work I do for coaching and developing leaders. So that's www.mayahuchan.com. It's MAYAHUCHAN.com.
Great. I do encourage everyone to check out Maya's work. She is somebody who I've admired for decades, and it's an honor to have Maya join us today. So you've been a wonderful guest who has embodied in your career, in your work, in your coaching, grace. So thank you, Maya.
Thank you, John.